Welcome to Support Life, a program focusing on current social issues from a life-affirming perspective. I'm Gavin Baulch, and my guest is Marco D'Angelo, a church planter in Melbourne. Welcome.
Hi Gavin, thank you for having us on your show.
Great. Now, you come from an immigrant family. Tell me about them.
Yes, both my parents, Maria and Angie, back in the early 1960s, 61 to be exact, made their way to Australia and along with their parents to make a better life for themselves, and they've worked hard to achieve the things that they needed to achieve in life.
Okay, so when were you born? On the way out or in Australia?
I'm born in Australia. I came along in 1969 and grew up in a place called Thomastown.
Mm-hmm.
And back then Thomastown was it was a difficult area,
mm-hmm.
but went to a lovely primary school, Thomastown Primary, and found my early primary school years growing up. Good. Over there.
Okay, now they came out by boat or ship, and but then you were born in '69, but you were conceived on a ship, I hear.
Mum and Dad, they took a holiday around the world,
mm-hmm.
and they had me shortly after.
Great, terrific. Now, if they came here and life was difficult in Italy, it wouldn't have been that easy starting off here in Australia.
No, one of the greatest challenges that my parents faced in the early days was language. Language barrier was relatively difficult, especially my mum. She was Polish, so my mother's got Polish background, and so she actually tells me the story of in her early days when, because she was relatively young when the family migrated along with her family. And one of the difficulties that Mum succumbed to was having to go to school and not speaking a word of English. And so back in Poland, she found herself in an educational system where she was in year 6, but then coming back to Australia, they had to throw her back. She was 16 and having to throw her back into primary school. And so she found it relatively difficult. And she tells a story that both her and her brother would many times not find themselves at school and going elsewhere because of the difficulties of just being so much older in a school, mm-hmm. Surrounded by younger children. And so it was relatively difficult for my mum in her early days.
So did she overcome that? Did she do further education, or what happened?
No, she found herself actually leaving school after about a year of being tossed to and fro, and started work relatively early, around the age of 15, mm-hmm. 15, 16, just worked from a very young age, and basically has worked all her life.
Mm. So the work ethic, let's call it, was well established.
Yeah, that's true. Both my parents have worked hard, and as a result, that's been instilled in my life. And in the process of all that, I went to school. I didn't achieve everything I'd hoped to achieve at school. I struggled quite considerably. Mm-hmm. I think one of my greatest struggles was probably because I did have, I think my parents' background, both, not achieving a school, a high school standard. Yes. It was difficult for mum and dad to both be teaching me. I had no one to go to, yeah. And they did their best, Gavin. I really remember a time when I was growing up in a time when the encyclopedia was just going door to door. And, mum and dad thought that by buying every brand of encyclopedia, they were doing me a justice. But unfortunately, it just was one of those things that...
So how many encyclopedias did you end up with?
Well, we ended up with the Encyclopedia Britannica, the Australian Encyclopedia, Walt Disney Encyclopedia, and there was one other, the Merit Encyclopedia.
Oh, good.
And I think that was all the actual salesmen that come to the door, mm-hmm. and mum and dad thought, well, we can't help him, but we'll try and help him by providing...
So you can take a very intellectual approach to any of the Disney films.
Yes, that's quite true.
Right.
It was quite educational.
Good. Okay, but a lot of your education would have come not so much at school but out of life itself.
That's exactly right. As I said, I went to school. I enjoyed my primary school years and I struggled through them. And high school was always a challenge. And I found myself, in the early days of high school, getting to year 10 and just thinking, oh boy, am I going to get through this? And having and there's always that stigma, I've grown up with the stigma saying, well, you're born in Australia, you're an Australian, and you should have been okay going through the school system. But education was one of those levels that was difficult, and so what I've learned through the values of mum and dad, that working hard is the way you achieve, what you're wanting to achieve in life.
All right. Now, did they start their own business? What happened?
Mum and Dad, in the early days, actually, Mum and Dad were both, I think they were either 22 or 23. I was 20, so they would have been, don't quote me on this, but it was their early 20s, and they got into a pizza business with my mum's brother, my dad's brother-in-law, and they've been in the pizza business for quite some time, and they did quite well from it, and so the business principle, the business ethics, I would say, has been instilled in my life growing up. I remember spending numerous hours in the pizza business and just watching Mum and Dad work hard, and I would say that they actually instilled the ethic of work. And not long after, in my early years, I too ended up running my own business. Okay,
we'll come back to that in a moment, but next time I visit, I'm expecting you to serve me a pizza. All right. You're watching Support Life, and we'll be back after the break. Welcome back to Support Life. I'm Gavin Baulch, and my guest is Marco D'Angelo, a church planter in Melbourne. Marco, you make good pizzas. I'm sure you make good pizzas. But you started your own business when you were young.
I did. I was 24 when I started out in business. So I had worked for a couple of smaller businesses in the meantime, and came to the realisation that working for somebody wasn't going to make me any money. And so I'd seen, as I said before, Mum and Dad working and achieving what they wanted to achieve, and so I launched out, and I met a friend of mine in my early days at college. I'd gone to a Bible college where I spent 3 years, and coming out of that Bible college, I was 24, and the friend of mine over there, he said, would you like to go into business? And he taught me the industry, and I spent the next 2 years just building a life and a business of my own, where we were able to, support a family. I got married young. I got married at the age of 21, and to my lovely wife Alicia, and so I realised that I had to support a wife, and knowing one day that we'd have children of our own, and today we have 2 beautiful children, Jonathan and Antoinette, and my son's 15 and my daughter is turning 13. Yes, I hope 13. And so, yeah.
Great. All right, now, in this journey of life, starting a business early, doing some unusual education, going to a Bible college, you had a number of people under you, didn't you? You employed some people?
Correct, yes. After having running a solo business for a couple of years, we ended up having the business become a company, and we had about 8 subcontractors that we were supplying work to in Sydney, and just learning some business skills, knocking on doors, and just asking if we could service them, and the business just grew. I was a persistent kind of fella, had a few knockbacks when we were asked, but I kept knocking on that same door, and eventually persistent pays off. And I think that's one of the things that I've learned: never give up, even in the process when things seem rather difficult.
Okay. Now, as you grew up in business, you would have struck some awkward customers. You would have become, what would I say, a good student of mankind. Human nature? That's
correct. There's always the difficulty of running your own business. Business is never an easy, thing to do, but when you're dealing and you come across customers that are rather challenging, it's always the approach. You approach someone with the right attitude, and you'll always get the result that you hope to achieve. And I say that's just the basic principle of life. If you show people respect, and respect is then given back.
All right. So you married young, had a business, did some training at college. In that time, when the first unexpected pregnancy comes along, it's announced you're going to be a dad. Did you fall back on what would you have considered business too tough and would have gone for an abortion? What was the situation?
No, when my wife was pregnant and business was humming along, one of the areas of life was abortion was not a consideration at all. I believe that you battle on no matter what circumstance you find yourself through, and trusting that God gives you the strength and the grace to carry on and meets your every need. I'm a believer of life, and even when life gets difficult and you're put in a situation where you're confronted with making the hard decisions, the area of taking a life is not one that I would have considered.
So these values for life, how did you pick them up? Did they just sort of come to you in a flash, or?
No, the value, I think my parents would have instilled quite a bit, the value for life. My mum always recounts the story of her early days, and there were times in her life when it was difficult. Early settling, especially during war times in Poland, it was rather difficult. And Mum had constantly instilled the value of life. And even though she herself had a difficult time, there was never one moment that she had said, "I wish I hadn't have been born." And I'd say the value of life has been instilled from early days.
All right. So the joy of having your first child, what was that like?
Well, I cried immensely, Gavin. Knowing just what my wife was going through, and watching the birth, the experience, and in fact, I do tell a funny story, Gavin. When my son was first being delivered, the doctor was handing me the scissors to cut the umbilical cord. I was so overwhelmed with the emotion and the tears, and I couldn't barely see what I was cutting, and the doctor said I was getting a little bit too close, and he moved my hand more on the cord because I was getting too close to his genital area. And but it was the most amazing time of life.
Awesome. So you, instead of turning into a doctor that did circumcision, you became a businessman in building and painting and such like.
That's correct.
Great.
Yes.
All right. Second child?
Second child, Antoinette, and she's definitely, one of a joy. She's Daddy's princess, and she was very much a joy in our life. And it's just been a joy fathering. It's been a joy being a father. It's been a joy being a dad, and being a provider, and absolutely have no regrets whatsoever. God has gifted and blessed us with two wonderful, beautiful children, and we just thank Him dearly for it.
Well, thank you, Marco, for that advice. You're watching Support Life, and we'll be back after the break. Welcome back to Support Life. I'm Gavin Baulch, and my guest is Marco D'Angelo, a church planter in Melbourne. Now, South Australia, why South Australia? I mean, here you were established in Melbourne.
Yeah. One of the greatest challenges, Gavin, was Adelaide's very well known for a city of churches, and but there's always room for one more church, I believed. And so we moved in an area. It was actually a very a high social economic area. And I truly believe that, within my heart, they needed a gospel as well. And so we found ourselves moving into an area where people were double income and, just needing to spread the love of Christ to these people. And we found ourselves there for a couple of years.
Issues at that time, 2001, thereabouts.
Yeah.
What was the climate like on marriage, divorce, pregnancy, abortion? Did you bump into those issues?
Not where we were actually situated. The social climate of the place was perhaps more. My area was a lot more of homelessness, and I found myself working with a group of people that needed social assistance. And so in my early days I started working in the streets. I'd find myself going and feeding the homeless, and we did that for quite some time. And of course we came across, the occasional person that had found herself pregnant. She's on the street, and we did our best to encourage her. And I found myself always, I would have loved to have had facilities and places to bring the people to assist, but found myself continually referring, the young mums to places where they could find the assistance needed to carry through life.
All right. So, working with kids on the street, as I said, you're a good student of human nature. You moved to Melbourne?
Correct. Moved to Melbourne in 2009, and it was back here that we found ourselves once again planting a church, and we planted in the northeast suburbs, I think it is, out that way, and coming into a climate of where people just finding themselves double income, just struggling with life, and I'm finding that working in a community where people just don't seem to have much time for community, where they're just so busy with living life and paying mortgages.
Okay, so it's a kind of a false economy here. The appearance of a nice house, new suburb, but underneath real struggles. Correct,
yeah. And so we find ourselves, just continually trying to meet the social needs of the folk that have a need of
just that love and compassion.
Just love and compassion, and being accepted and wanted, and we're living in an area where the slogan is growing in community, and so we try to build on growing in a community. So we start a church, and we're trying to build that community within a church.
So how new is this? Is it a suburb or a shopping strip, or how would you describe where you are?
Well, Doreen's been around for quite some time, but Lorimer, which is another subdivision within Doreen, it's relatively new. It's probably I think it's 6 or 7 years old, and still developing area. So much land and so many young families. It's definitely a young area, and so it gives myself as a church planter the opportunity to meet and greet young families and do our best to, you know, show them love and meet their needs where we can.
But you're also finding that to supplement that call, you're falling back on your business skills.
Correct. I've had to just find myself working a couple of days a week. So church planting is not a lucrative exercise. Nobody does it because of the money. But so, you know, I find myself, I'm working for an internet-based company. And even the boss himself has been extremely generous and gracious in providing a job for myself 2 days a week, and finding myself that, again, you know, God has met our needs, and it becomes also an example, you know, to the community that I can say, look, this is what God has done for us in my life, and no matter the circumstances you find yourself in, you know, God can meet your needs as well.
Yes. So, as you said, it's a young, growing community.
Correct.
And north of Melbourne, quite north of Melbourne, there's not much development going above that, is there?
No, the next area up is Whittlesea, so there's probably about a 15-minute drive between the two, and so.
All right. Well, Marco, thank you for that piece of history. You've been watching Support Life, and that's all for our program today. Join us again next week. Goodbye.